The Language of Silence by VMS is quite lyrical, realistic, and meditative. Dr. Meera believed that silence was the purest form of dialogue. It was one language that both healed and revealed the past between pain and understanding, between what was said and what was felt. Her home, tucked away in leafy corner of the old town, carried the scent of sandalwood and sea breeze. It was filled with books, plants, and stillness of long afternoons after her husband's passing. The silence had deepened, not as an intruder, but as a presence she could no longer ignore. Across the narrow lane lived Rajiv Menon, an architect known for his presence with both people and space. His balcony was often strewn with the sketches of half finished buildings, schools, memorials, homes that would one day shelter other lives. Where Mira studied human structure, Rajiv shaped physical ones. Their worlds, though different, were parallel but striving to bring balance to what time erodes. They met first through a shared garden wall. She was trimming her basil shrub, and he was sketching the shadow of a tree. Their first words were not words at all, just a nod, a small acknowledgement between two solitudes that had recognized each other. Over the months, they became companions in quiet, and Mira would wave when he returned from his site visits, dusted in sunlight and soil. Rajiv, in turn, would leave a sprig of bougainvillea by her gate, an unspoken message that beauty too could be architectural. In her evening journals, Amira wrote, "He builds homes, I build stillness. Between us lies a conversation that does not need speaking." Neither of them knew it then, and it was unhurried, wordless friendship, and it is wordless, would become the blueprint of her final years, a kind of architecture that could not be seen, not only need to be felt. And in the quiet hour, Dr. Mera had always believed that the truest conversation began in silence. Her days followed a rhythm that was neither hurried nor idle, a rhythm carved by routine and reflection. Each morning she brewed her coffee, opened the windows, and let the sunlight spill across the terracotta floor like a benevolent visitor. And in the quiet hours before her clients arrived, she liked to sit by the pergola with her notebook open, not to write but to listen to the murmuring of the street, the whistle of a far off train, the internal hum of her own thoughts. For years, she had been a listener to others' voice. Now, in the stillness of age, she was learning to listen to her own. Across the lane, Rajiv Menon, the architect, began his day with pencil and tracing paper. His studio was a gentle chaos, a table crowded with blueprints, rulers, bits of stone, and models of buildings in miniature. Sometimes Mira could see him through her window, bent over his desk with brow lit by morning light. His concentration reminded her of meditation, the same surrender to ego, the same patience with perfection. One morning, while she was watering her basil plant, he called out, "Dr. Mira, do you believe silence can have structure?" She looked up, amused. "Structure, yes," he said, sketchbook in hand. "Like structure, how a pause in sound could be like an arc in a wall, holding everything in place." Mira smiled. "That is what therapy is too, Rajiv, creating safe space between words. No emotions can breathe." That was the beginning not of friendship but of a shared language. And in the evenings, he sometimes joined her on the pergola, their favorite spot, where they spoke little but shared the same twilight. Raji would tell her about his latest project, a home designed entirely around light and airflow, inspired by how old people sit facing windows or street views or skylit or in the pergola or gazebos, rather being indoors to feel feel the world without leaving it. And Mira listened, struck by how his vocabulary of spaces mirrored her own of feelings. You build with stone, she once said softly, but you also build with empathy. He smiled, and you build with silence, the language of silence. She thought of that sentence long after he had gone. It lingered in her like an echo, not of loneliness but of recognition. That night she wrote in a journal, every mind is a house. Some rooms are locked, some abandoned, some still under construction. Perhaps healing is not about erasing the walls but learning to open the right windows. I repeat, every mind is a house. Some rooms are locked, some abandoned, some still under construction. Perhaps healing is not about erasing the walls, but learning to open the right windows. Outside, the night deepened somewhere across the lane. A lamp glowed in Rajiv's steady, unwavering, like an idea that refused to die. And the garden wall that separated Mira's home from Rajiv's was low enough to talk over but high enough to preserve silence. It was made of old brick, moss scraping through the seams like green veins of memory. Every morning sunlight filtered through the neem branches and cast trembling mosaics of gold on both sides. Hers dotted with basil and hibiscus, his lined with bougainvillea and young bamboo. That wall became their threshold, a place where solitude met companionship, where words grew sparingly like wind flows between stones. I repeat, the solitude met companionship, where words grew sparingly like wildflowers between stones. Rajiv often worked outdoors, sketching designs on a wooden easel. Sit under the shade of a mango tree. Mira would watch him from her pergola, curious about the patience with which he drew. His sketches were not mere blueprints, they looked like meditations translated into line and form. Once, when she asked him why he preferred working there instead of his office, he replied, because gardens remind me of imperfection. Nothing here is symmetrical, yet everything feels balanced. She noted her mind tracing the connection between nature's chaos and human psyche. In therapy too, she too balance doesn't mean symmetry, she said. It means letting the untidy parts of our coexist without shame. He laughed softly. Maybe we are both architects. You are of minds and I of spaces. I repeat, he told. Maybe we both are architects. You of minds, I of spaces. And they giggled for some time. The slim simplicity of that moment lingered with Mira for days. As weeks passed, their exchanges deepened when Rajiv noticed a crack forming along the garden wall. He offered to repair it, but Mira stopped him. Let it be, she said. Some walls are more beautiful when they carry their history. He looked at her, then at the wall, understanding what she meant. That evening, as rain began to fall, they stood on either side watching the drops strike the wall like gentle percussion between them. Silence blossomed again, fragrant and full. Later, Mira wrote in a journal, the heart too has its walls, built to protect it, secretly longing to crumble. Perhaps love in its truest form is not about tearing them down, but learning to lean against them together. I repeat, the heart too has its walls, built to protect it, secretly longing to crumble. Perhaps love in its truest form is not about tearing them down, but learning to lean against them together. Raji began to visit her garden more often than that after he helped her replant the jasmine creeper, adjusted the stones along the path, and measured the sunlight as though designing an invisible home around her. Once, while pruning, he said, you know, Mira, every space we build reflects what we feel losing, and every person medicine we heal. She replied, teaches us what we still need to learn. By dusk, the wall glowed with a scent of wet earth and quiet companionship. It was no longer a barrier, it had become a bridge. And the next chapter, it is about the letters never sent. Dr. Meera had a ritual every Sunday evening when the sky softened into lavender and first street light flickered alive. She sat by a writing desk and opened a pale blue note. The pages held no plans or case notes, only letters she never sent. She likes to, write with her paper and pen to make it quite nostalgic, rather typing with a laptop or on a mobile to make it a note. This is a very traditional way she follows, and some way to address to her younger self, some to her late husband whose absence had longer turned into quite ago. At once she had always hesitated, began simply, Dear Rajiv. She never finished that letter. It wasn't love, not in the romantic sense the word love to label. It was something quieter, more ancient, a recognition, a sense of being seen without needing to speak. By day, Mira was a poised psychologist, listening, observing, healing others' lives like a patient gardener pruning sorrow. Her clients came with stories of abandonment, grief, the ache of not being understood, and she listened knowing that solitude was not always an enemy, sometimes it was a mirror. And he too, Rajiv, often see her through his window, the faint glow of a desk lamp falling on her hair, her pen moving steadily across the page. He would wonder what she wrote about, but never asked. One evening, as he delivered a new batch of lemons from his tree, he introduced the notebook lying open. His eyes caught a line. He noticed the notebook lying open. His eyes caught a line before she could close it. There's a difference between being alone and being witnessed in your aloneness. The later heals. Their eyes met and unspoken understanding passed between them. He smiled faintly. You write like you build souls, and you build like you write with light, she said teasingly. That night, Mira dreamt of her old house by the sea, the same one she and her late husband once planned to renovate but never did. She saw Rajiv walking through its ruins, running his hands along the weathered beams, sketching something invisible in the air, a restoration of what was broken, not to its old form but to something wiser. When she woke, she wrote, Maybe the heart is as unfinished home, and some people arrive not to live in it but to help us see how much light it can hold. The next day, Rajiv left a small note by the garden wall, just one line written in neat architect script. Every wall needs a window, Meera. She smiled as she read it. Then, for the first time, she tore a page from a blue notebook and slipped it under the potted fern of his side on the wall. The letter began, to Rajiv, in a world full of noise, your silence speaks the loudest. And she never knew if he read it, but from that day on, his evenings too were lit by the warm glow of a desk lamp. And the conversations with the wind, it continues. The wind arrived before dawn that morning, not as a storm, but as a whispering guest brushing against Mira's curtains like an old friend. It carried the smell of rain-soaked earth, of jasmine that bloomed too early, of a world of dreaming half awake. Dr. Mira stood by the balcony, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, coffee growing cold in her hands, her home lined with books and journals, quite except for the rustle of the pages she had left open on the table. The chapter title stared at her, Therapeutic Empathy and Weight of Silence, and she smiled how much easier it was to teach about empathy than to practice it upon oneself. That morning, her first client was a widower named Aravind. He had spent 32 years in the railways and now struggled to fulfill his hours. I keep hearing her voice, he said, especially when I try to sleep. Is that normal, Dr. Meera? Meera listened not as a psychologist but as a woman who knew the language of absence. The voice you hear, she said softly, is not madness, it is memory asking to be honored, not erased. When he left, she wrote in a journal, every patient brings a mirror. Some days I recognize myself in it. That evening, she found Rajiv with the terrace fixing the cracked tiles near the parapet. He looked up, his hat flecked with dust, his hand steady. You work even when it is dark, she said. He shrugged. Light is just another way to measure patience, and they stood side by side watching the wind tug at the clothesline, lifting a white bedsheet like a slow dance. You know, Rajiv said, architects and psychologists are not very different. She raised an eyebrow. How so? We both rebuilt what time weighs down. You use words, I use walls. Both need fate to stand again. That night, Mira sat at her desk and wrote to herself not a letter but a reflection. Maybe companionship is not about sharing space but rhythm, the pace of two solitudes, learning to breathe together. When the wind brushed her curtains again, she imagined it carry Rajiv's thoughts across the garden, and for the first time in years, her solitude did not feel like a sentence, it felt like a pause before a song. And the next chapter, it began with abandoned library, a squat, forgotten building near the old banyan tree, its windows fogged with dust and its doors swollen by years of monsoon neglect. Rajiv found it one evening on his wall, drawn by the faint glint of sunlight through broken glass, like a pulse still alive beneath ruin. When he told Mira about it, she listened as one might listen to half-forgotten melody. And a library, she asked. Yes, he said, or what used to be one. The books are gone, but the shelves still remember. The next morning, they visited together. The scent of old paper still lingered, dry, papery, and sweet with nostalgia itself. A spider had woven a perfect geometry across the central beam, and the dust motes rose like gold dust in the sun's first angle. Rajiv touched the walls reverently. Silence lives here, he said. Mira smiled. Then it's your kind of place. They decided to restore it, not to its former glory, but it's something new. A community library of reflection, they called it, where people could come not just to read, but to breathe, to write, to remember. As Rajiv sketched plans, gentle curves replacing harsh corners, open windows, welcoming light, Mira began curating the soul of the space. She selected books not by genre but by feeling, poetry that softened grief, essays that held kindness, memoirs that healed, and every evening they worked together in companionable quiet. Sometimes Rajiv hummed an old raga under his breath, sometimes Mira read aloud. From her journal, the wind often entered through the half-fixed windows, carrying pages and birds into unexpected corners, as if testing the building's acoustics for hope. One evening, Rajiv stood back and said, "A building is not complete until it begins to listen." Mira nodded. People too. That night, she wrote in a diary, "We are restoring not just walls but faith. That silence, when shared, becomes music." When the library reopened, it was a grand reopening, and it wasn't a grand reopening. No ribbon cutting, no applause, just a few villagers wandering in, tracing their fingers along the smooth wooden shelves. The scent of new paint and old dreams mingling in the air. In a quiet corner, Mira placed a handwritten sign: "You are not alone here. Even your silence has company." Rajiv saw it and smiled. He added a small brass plaque by the door engraved with his words. And so the library breathed again, not as a monument, but as a living testament to the architecture of silence, where every book, every pause, every look between them carried the soft pulse of something reborn. And between two windows, the monsoon arrived not with violence but with a slow, deliberate patience. Rain traced silver rivers along rooftops, drummed gently on the veranda, and sifted through the leaves of the garden wall that separated their homes. Dr. Mira sat by a window, notebook open, tea cooling in chipped cup outside. The garden shimmered, her basil and hibiscus drenched in water, bougainvillea drooping like crimson waterfalls, the cracked wall now alive with moss and life. Across the lane, Rajiv gestured a loose tile on his terrace roof, his hands moving with a precision of one who knew both the fragility and permanence of structure. Their eyes met through the rain streaked glass. No words passed, none were needed. Sometimes their afternoons merged in silence, and Raju would sketch on his easel, the pencil gliding across paper, while Meera wrote her reflections, letters never sent, journal entries, stories of her patients' lives, their rhythms, those separate harmonies like two instruments turning themselves before a concert. One evening, as lightning edged the sky and the wind pressed against the windows, Mira spoke softly. Do you ever feel the world is trying to wash itself clean? Rajiv looked up from his sketch, water dripping from his head. Perhaps, or perhaps, it's reminding us that nothing, not even walls or solitude, is permanent. She nodded. Even memories, they settle differently. Each person, he said, some grow stronger, some fade, but they always shape the spaces we inhabit, both inside and out. The rain continued into night, thick and unrelenting, but inside her home, Mira felt a stillness that was almost luminous, and it was in these quiet hours she realized something subtle but undeniable. The monsoon, Rajiv, the garden, her solitude, all of it was teaching her a new language, a language built not on words but on presence, the language of silence. That night she wrote in a journal, sometimes life exists between two windows. One looks out at the world, the other looks in. Between them, we find our reflection and perhaps a companion, you who mirrors our own depth without trying to possess it. I repeat, sometimes life exists between two windows. One looks out at the window, the other looks in. Between them, we find our reflection and perhaps a companion who mirrors our own depth without trying to possess it. And somewhere across the wall, Rajiv paused in his own sketching as though sensing the same truth and let the pencil hover over the page, still, patient, and reverent. The monsoon fell endlessly, washing the streets, the gardens, the rooftops, and for the first time in many years, Mira's solitude did not feel like an absence, it felt like a home. And the monsoon returned like a whispered memory draping the town in grey and silver. Dr. Meera watched it from a window, the same one she had tended for decades. Its framed, chipped, yet steadfast rain streaked the glass like rivers of thought, slow, reflective, inevitable. Her body, once tireless, is counseling, writing, tending to the lives of others, now reminded her of its limits. Yet she felt no fear, only a soft gratitude for the years she had been granted, the minds she had touched, the words she had written. Across the lane, Rajiv was repairing the terrace roof. The rain had loosened a few tiles, and he moved carefully, as always, patient, deliberate, precise. Each gesture mirrored his life's work, constructing stability without erasing imperfection. Sometimes Mira would watch him and think, he builds with stone, yet he understands the fragility of the human heart. And she, who had spent decades building bridges within others' minds, realized that the most profound architecture was invisible, the kind that held memory, emotion, and love without possession. One evening, as the monsoon's rhythm deepened, Rajiv called out softly, Mira, do you believe the rain knows how to forgive? She smiled. Perhaps it is not forgiveness it offers, but clarity. Every drop returns the world to itself. That night, she wrote in a journal, if I am to leave this world, let it be in rain, where everything returns to where it came from and nothing truly ends. The last journal writing of Mira, if I am to leave this world, let it be in rain, where everything returns to where it came from and nothing truly ends. She revisited the letter she had written but never sent, the one to Raji finally signed. With affection that asked for nothing, Mira. She placed it back in a teakwood box nestled among memories, journal entries, and reflections. When her breath slowed in the early hours of the morning, Rajiv found her there, pen still in hand, eyes closed in a serene pause, as if sleeping in the midst of a conversation she had been having with the universe. Library they had restored together stood in the quiet of the monsoon, open to those seeking solace. Her words, her journals, her reflections became a sanctuary, not a monument, but a living testament to her life's quiet architecture. Raji holding her signed letter whispered to the empty room. Even silence, it seems, can be full, and outside the rain continued its gentle conversation with the earth. It carried Mira's presence not as absence but as light, a light that would linger in the walls that she had touched, in the students, and that guided in the minds she had helped rebuild. The monsoon fell as it always had, relentless and tender and forgiving, and in that sound, solitude became a companion, memory at home, and love at quiet and enduring silence. The epilogue, a room full of light. The house was still that morning, but not empty. It held the first aroma of sandalwood and rain, the subtle warmth of teacups long cooled, and the quiet hum of a life that had been lived fully. Rajiv unlocked the door gently, mindful of the silence. Dr. Meera had passed in a sleep, serene pen still poised over an open journal. The doctor said it was peaceful, as if she had simply chosen to continue her reflections in another quieter realm. Her chair by the window still faced the garden. Her shawl lay folded on the armrest, the notebook open to the last page she had written. One day, even the silence will remember me, not for what I said, but for how I listened. May those I leave behind learn to sit beside their own solitude and find it kind. I repeat, one day, even the silence will remember me, not for what I said, but for how I listened. May those I leave behind learn to sit beside their own solitude and find it kind. Rajiv traced the words with his finger, feeling the weight of a life in every line. Opened the teakwood box she had kept by her desk, inside were her letters, her essays, fragments of her thoughts, carefully catalogued and luminous with intention. He found the one addressed to him, sighed at last with affection that asked for nothing. Mira. He pressed it to his heart, a quiet benediction. The library that had restored together, the project that had begun as a collaboration between mind and stone, stood waiting outside, doors open, welcoming the world into her wisdom. Every shelf, every light filtered corner, every window that Rajiv had designed to catch the sun now carried her essence, the essence of patience, reflection, and quiet guidance. In the days that followed, her students, colleagues, and villagers who had walked into the library felt her words and presence. Her words echoed in the spaces that she had touched. Even in solitude, one can build a home for the soul. And Rajiv lingered in a study long after others had gone. He traced her notes, adjusted the papers, and then opened the windows wide. The morning sunlight poured through, and dust moths danced in the golden streams. A small miracle alive with her memory. He whispered softly, every silence can hold light, and in that house across a lane, between two windows, Mira remained not as absence but an illumination, a room full of light, a light fully reflected, a legacy etched not in stone but in every quiet mind she had touched, every wall he had built with reverence, and every heart that had learned to listen. The Language of Silence by VMS.